So I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I started in movies in Hollywood and actually in China, which was very interesting. Two very different cultures for how movies play in the culture. And I thought I would just work on movies my whole career, but I got a call from a young guy who actually bought Activision. How many of you know Activision, the game company? It's a big commercial game company. So he and two of his friends actually bought the company for $440,000. It was basically being run into bankruptcy. And they moved it to Hollywood because the CD-ROM was coming out, and it used to be games would be made by one or two programmers who would do the art, the programming, the design, and everything. But suddenly you had all this storage, so they wanted to get writers and animators and storytellers. So I got hired from the film industry. There was about 12 people at the company at the time. And we had a couple hits, and the company just kept growing. Two of those three are still running it. It's a $40 billion company now. It's a remarkable business story. I ended up running production for a bunch of years, but then I got really interested in the power of games to do more than just entertain and make money. And I got really interested in games for learning health, social impact. So I became chairman of a nonprofit to rise the sector of games for learning, games for health, games for social impact, which is happening all over the world right now. And then I realized there was no commercial company that was doing it. And I wondered if you could make commercial games that would compete with all the games that you yelled out, but that also had some sort of benefit for society. And so we founded a company to do that. And we were doing mostly games for schools. We did the education version of Minecraft, which was very popular in schools. It's still very popular in schools. We did games to teach kids to make games. We've worked in refugee camps. We've worked in the Middle East on civic engagement during the Arab Spring with games. Really interesting, provocative use of games. But we had never made a commercial game until we got a call from the woman you're about to see on the screen from France, from an Alaska Native tribe that wanted to do a business that made money, that shared and celebrated their culture with a global audience. And empower their youth, and their youth play lots of video games, like you guys. And it was a challenge. When I went up there with my business partner, we originally tried to talk them out of making the game because it's so risky. A commercial video game is a high-risk investment. But we ended up doing a lot of research, and we figured out if we could get the right partners and the right talent and line everything up, we would have a chance. And we're going to talk a little bit about that process, and we'll show you a little bit of a trailer of the game, and then we'll talk about how the game led to Fab Labs and kind of the future of personalized manufacturing. I think they're still trying to get set up. I don't want to give away the whole presentation. Does anyone have any questions about, in general, video games or the video game business before we get into the fab stuff? Yeah?
Are you worried that bringing video games to teach in classes is going to affect the structure that, like, the schooling system is supposed to teach kids? Like, learning is supposed to be fun, but doing things, like going somewhere and doing something you have to do isn't always going to be fun. Do you think that's going to have like an impact on the reality when they get out of school?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the thing is, games, the essence of games in many ways are, games invite you into a problem space. You have a challenge, and you're invested in that challenge. And then you have agency to act. Games are about verbs, so they might be action verbs, running, jumping, shooting, or thinking verbs, solving, strategizing. And you get a lot of feedback. In games, you fail most of the time, and a lot of the art of games is giving you just enough challenge where you think, you can reach and do it, and if you fail, you get lots of feedback. You might get feedback from the game, from a mentor, from a peer online, and you get closer and closer to your goal, and you develop mastery. Now, that mastery is whatever the game mechanic is. Ultimately, that's good learning. It's really project-based learning. And it does switch the structure of a classroom where teachers become more mentors, and individuals, students, or groups of students are invested in a challenge, and they're working and they're getting feedback. You can even take the word game off, and that's good project-based learning. The elements of games are, you can add competition. Sometimes competition is really exciting. Sometimes it's not great for learning. Team-based activities like guild games like World of Warcraft. There's a lot of research that show that players who run guilds in World of Warcraft often become business leaders Because if you think about it, they have to get people, sometimes they've never met around the world, to show up on time, coordinate a goal, accomplish that goal. That's really hard. That's management. And lots of people have said they kind of learn that management training through playing games. Games aren't good at a lot of things. You know, when there's certain type of knowledge that has to be passed on, games aren't always good at that. And often they're really bad games and really bad learning when people try to push those things together. But when games are used as an overall structure, I'll give you an example. We worked with 2 social studies teachers in Texas. Kids weren't interested in the middle school history. They turned the whole class into like a civilization type game where kids were sort of competing, but they had to do all the research they would do, but in the context of this, and it was a paper-based game, it wasn't a digital game. All the parents were upset, the administration was upset, but the kids' scores went through the roof. They were at home, they were working with their teams, they were studying, and now that curriculum is being used all over the place. So there's lots of different ways to find the right balance between when are games and game mechanics useful and when are they not in learning. Yeah?
Okay, so one of the things that I'm curious about is, so we're talking about augmented reality, virtual reality. You have things like the Kinect.
Like what? I'm sorry?
Things like the Kinect for
Right.
Xbox. And so one of the things that, and of course PlayStation's got their PlayStation VR. So with that coming up, and we had, you know, one of the things that I feel like never got developed out completely is like when the Kinect came out, the hardware was neat and it gave but by the time the second gen hardware came out, it was better, and then no one developed it. And I know that someone at Microsoft said at one point that they wasn't pushing for VR because as of right now, because they were afraid that the market would get saturated. It would be the software wouldn't be quite ready for the hardware, and then people would try it, they would experience it and go like, well, that was kind of neat, but and then the interest would die out, and you don't want to see that. So how is Hackathon, like, is there a thought process that are like you want to use that next level of hardware, but you have concerns, or you have a process of how you kind of introduce it in a way in a time where Max is honest, is that once people experience it, they're like, yeah, that I want more of that, and it's not a fad.
Yeah, I mean, so that we could spend an hour on that question. It's one of the toughest parts of the game business. In the 25, 30 years I've been doing it, I've seen many platforms come and go, all the way back to the Atari 2600, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, the Nintendo GameCube, and many of you probably never even heard of that we've supported, all the way up to all of the different VR platforms, AR platforms, emerging platforms. Part of the art of and games can take anywhere from 6 months to 7 years to make. So when you're making decisions about what platform you're going to support, you need to do your market research and understand what are the installed base of the platforms, what are the platforms good at, what are they not good at, what are your teams good at, what are they not good at. And there are cycles. Some people have been very successful at getting games on a platform as soon as it comes out, where there's only 6 or 7 games, and so you're going to rise above the noise because it's not like the million games on the App Store on Apple or the 10,000 games on Steam. So getting there early and taking advantage of the technology, whatever it is, whether it's a new Microsoft, Sony, a new VR, can be very, very powerful. That usually means you need a relationship with the company. They need to give you the development kits early before they come out, and then you need to optimize it so that they can highlight it. If you come later in the cycle, there's many more games, but you have more experience. So it's really the business part of making games that is critical to the success of a publisher like Activision that doesn't just develop them, they market and distribute games. Are we close? Okay. So, I mean, lots and lots of time is spent doing that research. And we're in an interesting time right now in the platform cycles. A lot of people are saying consoles are going away. And everybody's, they're fighting over the living room. Who's going to control the living room? Is it going to be mobile devices with consoles? Is it going to be the tablets? Nintendo always comes up with something unique and different. Everybody wrote Nintendo off, and then they came up with the Switch, which seems to be taking off. And that's a whole different play pattern. And VR, you're just now seeing profitable games on the VR. That's becoming a large enough installed base that you can start to make games for VR. Other than Pokemon Go, we haven't seen a lot commercially on the AR space. And the affordances of mobile AR and mobile VR are very different than, say, a Vive, where you have to buy a whole expensive kit. So it's a complicated business. I would say about 90 to 95% of the companies that were around in the early 90s when I started are out of business. Very few are still in business. I've seen many companies come and go. Because it's entertainment, it's technology, it's consumer behavior. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it exists, but how far out is it, the technology world, where you can get on the VR and do like a first-person shooter?
Well, you can do that now. You certainly can. There's a lot out there. I mean, it's a little bit scary. It's a little bit scary, actually. The more realistic the graphics and the more immersive, I think there's going to be real concerns on multiple levels about the content and even, what they're now doing fMRI brain scans of kids in virtual reality. Everything changes your brain. Your brain is plastic. Everything changes, and we barely understand the changes. And they're not all bad. We actually had a grant from the NSF to study how first-person shooters change your brain for benefits, actually. Spatial reasoning, lightness, darkness, and the grant was with Sesame Workshop to isolate the mechanics, take out the violence, and see if we had the same brain changes, which was fascinating. When you look at brain scans of somebody reading a book, watching a movie, or playing a game, they light up very different parts of the brain. And this is a science that we're just beginning to understand. So, I mean, first-person shooters certainly exist on every platform, but the sort of how fun they are, how visual they are, is a debate, and it's emerging. But I think we have Amy. I think we can start.
No, Amy just left.
Oh, we almost had Amy.
We had her for a second. We're gonna get her back. You want to put the presentation?
There was another question? Yeah, in the back.
Sorry, on a little lighter note, what years were you in Activision?
I was there from 92 to 2000.
So you were there for MechWarrior 2?
Yeah. I would say most of my gray hairs are because of MechWarrior 2.
Thank you for your service.
Offline, I'll tell you the story. That was a remarkable experience in our life, and it actually catapulted Activision. And it's miraculous that game even exists. And Heather lived through it as well. So I think we're ready. Do we have Amy?
Why don't we start with the presentation? We're getting Amy back.
Okay, since I talked about this, I'll go through it pretty quickly. Hopefully you'll get Amy, because she's absolutely remarkable. So these are Amy's slides. So the Cook Inlet Tribal Council is a really amazing, pioneering Alaska Native tribal organization, a social service organization. The Cook Inlet is around Anchorage. It's the inlet that goes down from Anchorage. There's 11 tribal organizations in Alaska. And the core vision for the Tribal Council is really to help make their community and their individuals self-sufficient. Part of that, Gloria O'Neill, who runs the Tribal Council, Amy is the executive vice president, they were challenged by their elders in the board to say, hey, we work on helping our individuals become self-sufficient, but as a tribal nonprofit, you're largely dependent on oil revenues and government grants. You should look at doing some businesses that are aligned with our mission and values, but can make money. And they were actually inspired by the Mississippi Choctaw as a pioneering entrepreneurial tribal group. So they looked at a lot of different businesses. So I talked a little bit about Uline, so I won't spend too much time. So these were some of the games that we had made. I mentioned Minecraft EDU. The Our City is the civic engagement in the Middle East, where it was a Facebook game, but to advance your city, you had to go into the real world, do civic engagement to get advancement in your city. So for example, if you wanted a soccer stadium, which a lot of people want in their virtual city, you had to go clear a vacant lot with a nonprofit and build a real soccer pitch in the world do a mobile check-in. And so we were playing with really interesting kind of social impact game mechanics across many different areas. We originally, when we met with Amy and Gloria in the Tribal Council, as I mentioned, as responsible social impact business people, we said that we cannot say just go ahead and invest your money. We really have to study how to de-risk the process. And for those of you who play games, you probably know a lot of the way that people discover games is on the e-stores. So if you play PC games, Steam is the main e-store. If you play mobile games, Apple App Store or the iOS App Store, or if it's console, especially if it's digital, it's XBLA or PSN. So we actually went to those folks and said, if we did a game at a certain quality level, and we were thinking of a puzzle platform game, and we picked some out like Limbo and Braid, and said if we did it at this quality level, and it was really authentically made with the Alaska Native community, would you feature it? And they said, absolutely, we're looking for more diverse games, but it has to be at that quality level. Just because it's good intention doesn't mean we'll feature it. Then we tried to find talent on both the Alaska Native community and the gaming community that wanted to go on this sort of bold journey. Because this is a craft, it's really, really hard. And we wanted to de-risk it by finding people who've already done really successful projects. So we also, and this took months, we had to build a lot of trust. We spent a lot of time with the Alaska Native community, because it's a very different community for us, but the Alaska Native community spent a lot of time going to video game conferences. Video games are a weird community as well. It's a culture. When you go to things like the Game Developers Conference or PAX, these very loud, kind of crazy game conferences, it's a culture. So we really immersed ourselves in our culture. We built a lot of trust. We negotiated deals where we all were working in the same shoes together, trying to accomplish the same goals. That took months of trust building. These are just some shots. I often say, and Amy often says, we didn't make a game about the Alaska Native culture, we made a game with the culture. So this is our creative director, he's a guy named Sean Beshy. He was the lead designer on MechWarrior 2, I realize, the game that we mentioned. He then went on and ran Tomb Raider, which you may have heard of. Tomb Raider is a very big, multi-billion-dollar franchise. He's been a very successful game maker for 20 years. He was kind of semi-retired in Seattle. He had 2 young girls. And Gloria and Amy sent him a bunch of stories that had been passed down for thousands of years, which is just really interesting. Why did these stories last for so long, one generation guiding another? And only recently they've been written down. Sean became really interested, and he agreed to help us build a studio. Amy and her team agreed to find dozens of Alaska Native elders, writers, and storytellers to go on the journey. That was Mini Gray. In Alaska Native culture, stories are passed down through families. We spent months, once we picked a story that served as the spine of the game, we spent months tracking Minnie down to get her approval, and we went through a whole indigenous rights approval with her. She blessed the idea of extending the story through video games. The game is in the Inupiat language. That was very important. That's James, the elder, who did the voiceover. We embedded 26 short documentary films in the game. This was a big discussion with the game makers. Video and video games don't usually work. Videos aren't interactive. There's been a lot of bad games with full motion video. I've made some of them. But there was something really powerful about seeing the Inupiat people, hearing their voices, that we really wanted in the game. So rather than make you watch the videos, as you play the game, and we'll show a little clip of the game, a little owl would fly away, and that means you unlocked a video, and you can go to your menu, and you can see a short documentary that sort of gives you more information. And it was actually one of the most best reviewed parts of the game, because it was truly optional. You didn't have to do it. So here's a quick trailer on the game, just so you can get a sense for it. Oh, I gotta go back. Hopefully it'll play. Let me try if I go forward again. That sounds like fun. Just takes a second. So when we announced the game at the Game Developers Conference, this is the trailer we released. So it's earlier, it's been
tuaholu kameksilla blui kimuneki reaktuatta kameksikkaroga inginerosia nuna sude kan enyonekto enyoni Almila, Shukrawa, Tukkat Kula Tuan, Al-Ghafruta, Tatkamna, Abitu Autam. Tamna Shimonyalendu, Mumina Tiradetu.
So that was the original trailer. It's a two-player cooperative game. We wanted to reinforce the theme of interdependence. You can't win as just the girl or the fox. You have to play Nuna and the fox together. The real world and the spirit world. The spirit world is a character in the game. Nature is a character in the game. And we had some success. We released it. We've had over 3 million players. It's profitable. We won lots of awards, including a British Academy Award. We got it, and the sort of best game of the year. This wasn't just educational games. This was against all games out there. We've gotten a ton of press. We have people dressing up as the characters at game shows and cosplay. We were a question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So it's seeping into culture right now. It's in museums all over the world. It's really been kind of overwhelming. We didn't get it all perfect, and if you're interested later, I can talk about the things we got wrong. But it really touched a nerve. And this is Ishmael, the Alaska Native writer, accepting a British Academy Award. He did the acceptance in the Inupiat language, which was pretty remarkable, with Dima, the art director, who created the beautiful art in the game. And all of that 3-year journey led to a lifelong partnership between our company and the Tribal Council. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about after the game and the transition?
Yeah, the video game for us was really just the beginning of a journey for us. And so once we started making the game with Eline, we realized this is a partnership that was going to grow deep roots and was going to be very meaningful for us. And so, as we developed our partnership, we took an ownership stake in Eline Media, and we're now the largest shareholder in Eline Media. And we have a merged management team where I serve as the CFO for Eline Media, and my boss, Gloria O'Neill, who's the president and CEO of Tribal Council, serves as the executive chair. And what that partnership has brought us is new, exciting ideas on how we can bring new types of programs, new types of ideas to our kids. And what's beautiful about what Eline's doing and the connections they made us is not about us giving and providing a program for the students, it's the students driving the program. And so what you're looking at right now is a picture on the left side of CIC's fabrication lab. And so this is a lab that we were inspired to create a connection with Eline Media and meeting Alan's brother Neil. And then we've also embarked on a world build project and recently completed it with Eline Media around the future of our communities. I think the exciting thing about this is about bringing our youth's voice into our future, whether it's through digital fabrication or through dreaming about what our world's going to be in 20 years.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of a fab lab that Amy mentioned, and my brother. So my brother is a physicist at MIT, and he taught this really interesting class about 10 years ago called How to Make Almost Anything. And he has all of these tools for fabrication, for making things, and he didn't know what people would make. But people made the most remarkable things. Like up in the top left, that box that the woman's wearing, that's a scream box. So sometimes when you're in a room like this and you can't scream out loud because you're really frustrated because the presentation's going on too long, you scream in the box, you hold it, and then when you go outside, you can throw the scream. I mean, it's a crazy invention just for her. This other one is a dress that this woman invented in the class that if somebody gets too close to her personal space, spikes pop up. These were inventions that when they weren't trying to build businesses, they were really making products for a market of one. And the idea of personal fabrication is something that we don't think about, but if we go back in history a little bit, this is the founder of digital computing. It was the biggest computer company at the time, I think it was in the 70s, and the CEO famously said, nobody needs a computer in their house, let alone in all of your pockets. That company is out of business. Personal computing became a world-changing technology. My brother's work is all around making personal fabrication a world-changing technology. We've had 3 digital revolutions. Well, one in communication, where we went from analog phone calls to digital phone calls. One in computation, where we went from old analog computers to digital computers. This is the 3rd digital revolution in fabrication. The first 2 digital revolutions have changed everything about how we live, learn, work, and play. The 3rd one is as well, but we're just at the beginning of it. So I wrote a book with my 2 brothers about this. And this seems like a very kind of intense graph, but very briefly, it's an interesting, it may be the most important graph in the last 100 years. So a guy named Gordon Moore in 1965 observed that you could double the number of transistors on an integrated circuit, which means you could double digital computing performance every year. You look back 10 years and saw that they doubled, which is an exponential curve. And he said if it doubles for another 10 years to 1975, we will have mobile phones, we'll have personal computers, we'll have smart cars. He wrote this in 1965. It was in an electronics journal. Very few people read it outside the industry. But he really predicted the next 50 years. The only thing he was wrong about is the curve lasted for 50 years, not 10 years. The doubling continued. So you went from massive computers that filled the size of this room to ones that are just as powerful that sit in your pocket. That changed the world. So this is sort of a map my brother made about how we're on the same journey. We're here right now. We've gone from fabrication that can fill a whole facility, like the one that you guys have down the street, to one that can fit in half the size of this room, and that's called a fab lab. And mostly they're in communities. We're talking about possibly bringing one here. And what a fab lab has, it's not that mysterious. It has digital software where you can design stuff on the computer. They call it computer-aided design, CAD. Then it goes to the machines, the digital machines. There's 3D printers, which you've probably heard about, which add stuff up using resins and things like that. But they also have subtractive manufacturing, which is a laser cutter that cuts with a laser, or a shop bot that cuts wood. And then there's embedded computing. And you can make almost anything in a fab lab. It's remarkably powerful. You can barely see it, but people are making houses, computers, skateboards, bicycles, and because it's digital, there's a map of thousands of fab labs, and because they have similar equipment, you can design something in Japan and print it out in Ghana or Alaska. So it's a network. You get the network effect. So Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about the Cook Inlet Fab Lab?
Yes, and so what you're looking at on this slide in the upper right corner is our Fab Lab building, and it's actually our entire youth center. It's a small building, we hope to expand it someday, but it's dedicated to providing opportunities for youth to engage with. And so forward, charged us with bringing the wisdom of our past into the future. And what our fabrication lab does, and if you look at the second picture down on the right-hand side, that's the inside of our fabrication lab. It allows kids to go in and experiment and learn how to use education to do new things and replicate old things. And so you can see on the left-hand side, there are a few examples of some of our traditional they've done a new way. And so there was digital scrimshaw, where they etched a piece of ivory from a walrus with the equipment there. And then they also use a molding process to recreate one of our traditional dance masks. And if you go to the next slide. One of the things that's been really interesting about the Fab Lab is we didn't know what it would be when it was started. We just brought in staff, we brought in the youth and let them really take off and decide what they wanted to do together. So these are truly youth-driven projects that the kids do. And you know, they may be working on something and saying, next time around I want to work on this. And so they do things like here they wanted to experiment with making snowshoes, and so they laser cut snowshoes out. They actually, one of the first projects we did in our Fab Lab was create a kayak out of pipe and actually duct tape and some other materials. And so what's really exciting about this is when you see the kids in the Fab Lab, it's not the staff that are teaching each other, it's the kids teaching each other. And I think oftentimes, since the youth are way more tech savvy than some of us adults, we're learning a lot from them too. This next slide shows how we've really expanded what we started doing, from doing simple molds and 3D printing to allowing our youth and young adults to say, I see this sitting, you know, I see something out there I want to try making. And so they started making our traditional dance fans, which you see on the left. And they've also decided to make guitars in our Fab Lab, and that's actually one of our more popular activities that happens. But the idea behind this is that the people who come in through our Fab Lab get to say, I want to try making this, and then they figure out how to make it. And it's an iterative process where they get to improve with each project. And if you go to the next slide, one of the really exciting things that we want to do in Alaska is that we want to make sure that the remote communities in Alaska that aren't on the road system have access to smaller fabrication labs. And so a couple of years ago, we helped Upyatik, which is highlighted in the video game. They're the community that partnered with us to make the video game, install a fabrication lab in the high school. And so what you're seeing here is the layout of their Fab Lab and some of the machines. And what's really neat about that is it allows us to share projects with the Barrow community and co-work on some of the local ideas we have. Like, what do we do with waste in a community? How can we reuse it? When there's all this plastic in Barrow, there's no roads, there's one ship a year that comes up there. Instead of letting it fill up the landfill, they're playing with ways onto digital 3D printing material. And one of the really nice things about fabrication labs is it's just not limited to within your community. It's worldwide, as Alan pointed out on the map before. And there's a lot of idea sharing and open source material out there.
So guys, should we stop here? I could do a little bit on 5 minutes on the future roadmap, or we could just pause for questions, because I know we ran a little bit behind on the setup.
We're actually okay, we have about 15 minutes.
Okay, so I'll touch a little bit on, so that's where the technology is right now. You can set up a Fab Lab right now, people are doing it all over the world, and the machines are going to get better, faster, and cheaper at an exponential rate. It'll be a little while before they're in the home or they're in your pocket, but it's coming. The future roadmap is a little bit more abstract, but it's kind of interesting. So my brother's core research right now is in two areas. One is in Fab Labs making Fab Labs. So you now can have machines that make the machines. So you can have a large Fab Lab that makes the machines for the smaller Fab Labs that make machines for smaller Fab Labs. And that technology is starting to happen, which is very interesting. One step beyond that, the core research that he's doing has to do with a bio analogy. So we have 20 amino acids that make up all of life. It's kind of, they're sort of unremarkable in and of themselves, but they form to create everything you see around you. He's now trying to replicate that in the lab. So he's come up with basically 20 digital materials that can form and reform to make anything. And you're actually seeing this in the labs. And NASA, who's here, is actually doing it for wings that are flexible and change during the weather. You can build a drone in a Fab Lab, but with these digital materials, the the drone could fly out of the printer and change based on the dynamic by everything being modular and shifting and changing. And ultimately, that's a way for sustainability. A forest doesn't make trash. It's constantly recycling itself. And so that's the future roadmap. And so we got some money from the federal government to build a game to sort of explore this. So we built, in virtual reality, a robot building game with the 20 materials. And some of them are flexural, some of them are conductive, and you can build and play and compete with robots and then take them apart and rebuild them all with these 20 materials. It's kind of like a smart Minecraft if you play Minecraft or Roblox, where every block is really smart but has an analog in the real world. So I don't know if you've ever seen the television show Star Trek, but there's a machine called the Replicator, where Captain Picard would often ask for Earl Grey tea hot. And the molecules would form and make whatever he asked. My brother, who's this physicist, was inspired by the Replicator. His whole career has been trying to build the Replicator. It shows you the power of media to inspire somebody to create something. But what's interesting about the Replicator, when we talked, when we were doing the world build with Alex and the team, and we talked to a lot of the people in the Fab Lab ecosystem, they hated the idea of the Replicator. They felt like if Apple were to create the Replicator, it would be a closed box. Nobody would know how to fix it. If the tea didn't come out the way Captain Picard wanted, he wouldn't know how to fix it. So maybe we need a mental map of a Replicator that people could go in and change and fix. But it shows you the power of popular media and images to create mental maps for the future that we build towards. This idea of indigenous futurism has actually been around for a while. This is a book by Grace Dillon called Walking the Clouds. It's a fascinating book about indigenous science fiction and futurism. There's a great group in Canada called AbTech. And if you're interested in this idea of indigenous futurism, it's worth exploring, because in many ways our maps of the future are made by popular media. Often we think of dystopian futures like the movie Blade Runner, where things are really chaotic and out of control. Or we have these weird utopian images where everything is white and a high-rise and people wear turtlenecks for some reason. And these are very, they're very simple images of the future. We need to create more images of the future, futures that are relevant to your community, your lives that you want to build. So that's something we're very much focused on. I think Alex in his presentation showed this image. But this is part of our Future of the Arctic World build, where we're thinking, what if the Arctic was entirely self-sufficient? They could grow their own food, they could use their own materials, but they were still globally connected. This is a community that only a few generations ago was entirely self-sufficient. In many ways, they're more set up to be self-sufficient than cities, because they know the flora, the fauna, they know how to live in their community, and with advanced technology, they can be truly self-sufficient. That's a powerful vision, and we can start to build the steps towards that vision. So Amy, we're on the last slide.
Yep, and so this is CITC's vision statement, and it's centered on our youth because they're our most important population. So our vision statement for CITC is we envision a future in which all of our people, especially our youth, stewards of our future, have access to vast opportunities and have the ability, confidence, and courage to advance and achieve their goals, infused with an unshakable belief in our endless potential. And I think the really amazing thing about working in the Fab Lab and also looking at the world build is that really we're putting the tools for our future in the hands of our youth. And so they're finding new ways to make things, new ideas on how to improve things, but they're also looking 20 years out to the future saying, this is what we're working towards, and so they can create the vision on their future and then realize it through the Fab Lab.
So I'll just add, in our focus groups with the youth and the elders in Alaska, one of the ideas that emerged was very interesting, where a rite of passage for every youth is to look at one of these crazy new technologies that you're hearing about at this hackathon, and infuse it with stories and values that have been around for thousands of years. That's what the world wants now with things like Facebook and all. If you listen to the questions that come up after the talks, it's often about risk and values and how is it going to change society. Well, they can co-evolve together if we do it proactively. So that's the presentation. Thank you. Do we have time for any questions? For Amy or I? Any questions? Or if you have a Fortnite question for Heather. games or Fab Labs or anything that we covered? Yeah.
Since the time nobody got questions, what about that network story for
I don't know if I should do it publicly.
Oh my.
I mean, this was many, many years ago. Activision inherited the rights. The intellectual property rights were owned by a different company. It was originally a board game. And so we had 7 months. It usually takes like 18 months to make a game. We had 7 months before the license ran out. And I still remember it was July 31st, like 1994. And the team that was working on it couldn't overcome the technology. It's actually a 3D robot game. It was one of the first real-time 3D games where everything moved in real time, not pre-rendered like an adventure game. Like at that time there was a game called Myst, and it was all pre-rendered. This was real time, which you would see in all the games right now. And that was very hard on the early technology, the early computers. And we realized that the team that was working on it just couldn't crack it. And we had another team that had done a successful game, so we started a second team up just to see if they could think totally out of the box and get a game done in 7 months. And it happened to be the most remarkable group of talented folks. Every one of them has gone on and are running major game studios right now. We just got lucky. It was the right group. In 7 months, they slept in the office. Every single thing that we needed to happen. We had a young guy from Korea that was a production assistant, and we needed music, and he said he does music. It turns out he was a huge musician in Korea. He made this award-winning score. He's now scoring James Cameron films. Like, everybody on that project had this secret talent somehow. And in 7 months, we got the game out like 4 minutes before our license ran out, and it became the most successful game. There were lots of other twists and turns, but that's the story. And to the question that you asked, what made that game so financially successful is it was pushing the processor. So Intel loved it, because Intel was coming out with the Pentium, which was a big leap in computing. And they were looking for games and software that showed the cool things that the hardware could do. So we got bundled on all their computers. All of the new game machines wanted games that pushed the processor, that did stuff in real-time 3D. So we were lucky. We were the right game at the right time, and it helped build what is now a multi-billion-dollar company. That's my quarter two story.
It made me buy my first 3D accelerator.
Yes, we were bundled with all the 3D accelerator cards. So the equivalent now is in the VR, AR space. Somebody is going to come up with the MechWarrior 2. I actually think it's that Boom Beats game, which I think is amazing on VR right now. Is it in there?
Yeah.
You guys should play that. It is the funnest party game. It's one of the best uses of VR that I've seen, actually. It's totally intuitive, it takes advantage of the space, and it's really, really fun. And it was a relatively small developer. They now have their own record label because it's a music-based game, and when you spend so much time in VR listening to the music, people want to buy the music. And now other people are doing music for their games, so they have a whole empire that they're building right now. It's fascinating. Any other questions? I think we're good then.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.